Now that we've seen how we can work with files, let's spend a little bit of time exploring how to work with the directories that contain our files. We'll start by opening up a new text file, and I'm going to save that as file directories, and I'm going to still call it file just so that they stay grouped with the other examples we've been doing called file. So there we are. We'll put our PHP tags in to start, and now we're ready to talk about directories. Now we've already seen a couple of directory functions before. Dir name, we saw to get the name of a directory, and isdir. We were doing is something a directory or is it a file? I also want us to take a look at get CWD. CWD stands for current working directory. And it's a little bit like the file pointer that we have inside of a file as we're moving around in there. It keeps track of what directory we're in. Now, up until now, we've been just working with everything from absolute references. Every time we tell it what directory we're talking about, we give it the full path name. But we also have the ability to move around in the directory structure from this script. So while filedirectories.php is running, we'll have the abilities to change into a different directory, do some things, change to a different directory, do some more things there, so that we don't necessarily have to specify the full file path every time. Let's go ahead and bring this up and see our current working directory. And then in a moment, we'll actually create a new directory and we can practice moving into there. So file directories, and you'll see that it's just the current directory where file_directories.php is located. That is the current working directory. So let's try creating a directory. We do that with mkdir, short for make directory. So we can do make dir, and then we'll need to tell it the name of the directory. We'll call it new. And then we also need to tell it what permissions the directory should have. I'm going to say 0777, and that will tell it to make that directory sort of wide open for reading and writing and everything. And I'll also just make a note here that that is the PHP default. Now let's go ahead and try it, and let's take a look. Let's run our script again. So now if we come over here, we take a look. Here's our folder, new. And if we actually go to our command line, cd into sites for me, b2b, sandbox, ls-la, will give us a list of all of them, and we can see new. Now notice what happened here. It did not give it the permissions 777. So you're thinking, wait a minute, did I give you bad information? Did that not work right? Well, the reason why is that there's something called umask, and it is a mask that is applied to these permissions whenever a folder is created. And every system has its own default umask that is set. By default, it's set to be 0022, I believe, which means that it's going to subtract out 0, 2, and 2 from that 777, thus giving us 755. I'll just go ahead and make it here. Default may be 0022. So this umask gets applied. We can have the ability to use the umask function to change it. I'm not going to go into details on how to do that. You can also just use chmod, which we learned earlier, to change the permissions on this. But I wanted you to understand umask so that it doesn't stay a mystery to you as to why when you tell it, hey, create this with 777, it comes up with 755 for the permissions instead. I just wanted that to sort of be demystified so that you know how to change it if you need to. Now, the other thing that we can do is we can create directories recursively. Recursive dir creation. And we can do that with make dir. And I'm going to say new/test/test2. And we'll go ahead and say 0777. And then we pass in true. And true is for recursive or not. So this will create not only new, but go ahead and create test and test2. Everything that it needs to create all of those, all the way down the line. So if we're passing in more than just one, you'll want to also include that true statement there. So let's just try this real quick. I can go ahead and hide that. We'll run just our script again. So file exists on line 11. You'll see we got an error here for this make directory. So you can see that this does check whether it exists or not. So if we were using this in a real script, we would also want to check and make sure that this doesn't already exist before we tried to do the make dir. But for our purposes, just to learn how this works, we already know how file exist works. We saw that at the beginning of the file chapter. So for now, we can just go ahead and say make dir, and we'll just accept those errors. So let's take a look here inside new. There's test, and there's test2. So that's really all there is to it. Now let's try changing directories, and we can do that with chdir. So dir new, that will change into the new directory. And now if we say, tell us the working directory, we'll see what we get back there. Now we're going to get a couple of errors here because those directories already exist. That's all right. but you'll see that now our working directory is new. So at the beginning of our script, we'd created a new file and opened a file for writing. It would have been in the B2B sandbox folder. If we do our chdir and we move our working directory into new, now when we create a new file, it's going to be in the new folder because that's our working directory. It works a lot like a pointer. And then, of course, the very last thing that we'll want to learn how to do is to remove a directory and rmdir. So instead of mkdir for make directory, it's rm for remove the directory. And then we'll need to tell it what the directory is. Now, again, we'll want to make sure that the directory exists before we try and remove it. We know how to do that. I'm not going to do it here. Now, also notice that I moved my working directory here. I'm inside new. So this won't work. Let's try it just to see what happens. Let's do reload. And you'll see that I come back here with another error saying no such file or directory inside the folder that it's in now. So that's the current working directory. If I take away the new, since I've changed my working directory, now we come back and I don't get the warning. And if we take a look here, you'll see that test2 is now gone. Test still stays there. It just removed the directory at the end of that. The very last thing that I just want to mention to you is that in order to remove a directory, that it must be closed and empty before we can remove them. And there are some scripts that can help you figure out how to wipe out all directories that already have files by looking on the PHP website for rmdir. You can just do a search for it. But that will give you scripts that other people have written that will help you to recursively delete everything that's in an entire directory. Now that we know how to create and delete directories and how to move around in them, we're ready to look at the contents that are in those directories, because a lot of times what we want to do is find out, hey, what files are actually in this directory. We'll do that in the next movie.